This is the meeting of the Lunenburg Finance Committee. My name is Peter Beardmore. I'm chairman of the Finance Committee, and I hereby call this meeting to order. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access channel and on Facebook Live on the Public Access Facebook page. The following information is also provided for members of the public that would like to participate in the meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, please use the link listed in the agenda that can be found on the Lunenburg Town website or through the Zoom app using meeting ID 7927370353, or from a telephone, dial toll-free 888-475-4499 and enter that same webinar ID 792-737-0353. If you have not registered with Zoom, you'll be asked to put in your name and an email address. No participant ID is needed, just press pound when asked. Telephone users may dial *9 to request to speak after joining the meeting. Computer and app users may use the raised hand feature to request to speak. Please note that the available Zoom option, broadcast, and recordings. Speaking of recording, I need to unpause that.
Recording in progress.
There we go. Recordings are for the convenience of the public. If any technical difficulties were to occur, the meeting will continue. If you wish to continue to participate, you must report to the location on this notice. Please be aware of this and plan accordingly. The agenda lists all the topics which may be discussed at the meeting and are those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken as a result of these discussions. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by the open meeting law. And with that, would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I do want to note that tonight's meeting, Tom Baelish is unable to attend. Jay Simeone is participating remotely via Zoom, and Dave Passios, I expect, will probably also be participating remotely, but not immediately. He may drop in later. With that, are there any announcements? Members of the board? No? Okay. Any public comment from members of the board? Any public comment from members of the public? Ms. Licio.
Hi, Rhonda Licio, 181 Reservoir Road. I attended the capital planning meeting on Monday night, and one of the items which jumped off the page at me was in priority 14 for the DPW under the facilities. And this is a hazardous material abatement, and the amount is $755,500, and that was the original cost when the Vertex report came out. This was, and I will mention, this was the highest ticket item of all the DPW requests, including infrastructure and vehicles and equipment. And my concern that I'd like to bring to you tonight is that you have a finance committee representative on both the capital planning committee and TCP design committee, who I would think the job would be to represent the Finance Committee as far as looking out for the best financial interest of the town. And when I see a number like $755,000, and this is a number that is not going to go down ever. It can only go up. For a building that the town was actively seeking funding to renovate or demolish and rebuild, to delay a high-ticket item like that and just include it in the debt exclusion later, that has the same impact on the taxpayer as it would just to pay that cost outright. There's no financial benefit. And so I just don't understand why the Finance Committee representative who gets to see this number in two different capacities would not bring this to the attention of the Finance Committee, the committee they're serving on. I'm actually in favor of demolishing that 55,000 square foot monstrosity. And no matter what we do with that building, that abatement needs to occur. So I cannot see delaying this portion of this project that needs to be done on this building. That's my comment. And my suggestion would be to consider maybe this representative has been spread too thin, or I just feel like we need to have more eyes on these kinds of things from a financial perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. I can honestly admit I did not know that was even on the list. So thank you for bringing it to my attention. I did not watch the meeting, and I think that will obviously be discussed in some detail in the coming meetings. So thank you.
We haven't seen the list yet.
No.
Yeah, so until we've seen the list, there's not much we can do, in my opinion.
But I mean, it's absolutely worth discussion. It's a pay me now, pay me later kind of thing. We have to spend that money sooner or later, so.
Sure.
Yeah.
We also, we haven't met as a board since.
This is it. This is the first time, yeah.
Since town meeting, so.
Okay, any other public comment? Hearing none. Town manager, finance director report. Which one drew the short straw? You drew the short straw.
The only thing that I wanted to let you know is that the tax rate has been certified by DOR based upon all the activity that happened at the town meetings that we held. It was $17.74 in FY21. It's $17.19 in FY22.
That's it?
That's all I have.
Awesome.
That's a big one, huh?
Madam Town Manager, we good?
Good evening.
Good evening.
So I'll just give updates since your last meeting on the special town meeting the day of. So these are all been discussed at select board meetings. We submitted the Green Communities Annual Report and Final Report. That was part of the 2020 competitive grant, so we can apply for funding in the spring, and that would be another competitive grant. The ARPA, as far as an update on that, I've been working on getting a proposal from a company. It's called Capital Strategic Solutions. So they specialize in doing outreach and procurement and reporting, everything that is in high demand right now with ARPA. And so this would be all beneficial to us. So I'm waiting on that proposal. And, there's, as Karen can attest to, there's a lot of reporting that goes along with these funds, which quarterly, annually, and we'll be doing that for quite some time. The tax collector will be holding a tax lien sale on February 16th, 2022. And that's for all properties that are in tax title. So that should recoup some funds and prompt people who are behind on their taxes to get those taxes up to date. So we should see an increase in outstanding taxes that are paid. The small bridge grant program, we were told by our engineer that that should be opening up in the first quarter of '22. And we have an application ready. That's for the Flat Hill Bridge Culvert Project. So we hope to, we'll put an application in as soon as that opens up. And that timeline would mean construction will probably be in the fall of '22 if we're awarded funds. But
Do you know what the timeline is for that award?
I believe it would be a spring announcement, like late spring.
Before town meeting.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting to, is the town meeting and
Yeah, unfortunately, it was
put ourselves in a
late this
situation
year.
where we probably need to, we need to expend additional funds for that, knowing that we, we're waiting on a grant application, and then those funds may need to be reappropriated later in the year or something like that.
Yeah.
Is it a competitive grant, or is it something that you normally would get?
It is a competitive grant, but this project is ideal for this program. It fits all the criteria because of the condition of the bridge.
And we've already appropriated some amount of money for this.
We have 428,500, I think is the.
And what's the delta to what we think it's
The
going to be?
last estimate we got from our engineer, I think, was around 750 around there. So that's where they were seeing prices come in.
Okay. And are we going to apply for the full amount or the delta
The
from what we've already?
Maximum is 400.
Okay. So we're going to contribute money to this regardless, but it's, okay. See, I'm envisioning a scenario where we're looking at another $300,000 in capital to go to this contingent for not receiving, because we have to take care of this culvert one way or the other, right? So I'm assuming there's another, again, having not watched the capital planning meeting, is there money for this on the capital?
That was not one of the projects that was
It's not?
listed. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you think you're going to recommend going in a town meeting without a backup?
I'll talk to the engineer about timing of that and if we should plan for that, if the announcement will not be in time, so.
Okay.
How old is that estimate from the engineer?
From the spring.
Yeah, it's this year,
Okay.
yeah.
So it could easily be 50% higher at this point.
Or less.
Lower, yeah.
Or less.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, I thought the,
Oh, the spring, yeah, I see what you're saying, yeah. You're probably right, yeah.
In other updates, grants, we received a recycling dividends program grant for $6,600. The state notified us that we received a $50,000 grant towards hazardous materials abatement at the old primary school. And I've already got the ball rolling on that to have engineer put out specifications for that so we can get that project out.
is that
Good.
to gain the 15% unusable space back, or just to kind of mitigate the?
Old primary.
Old primary.
Okay.
Subtracted from demolition costs, basically, is what it-
Yes,
is
so
what
we'll see how
means.
far that gets us in that.
Okay.
We received the Maya Risk Management Grant for $10,000. That's to purchase the Microsoft Office 365 licenses. So that's begun at the DPW. And
Is that-
will
Begun-
continue migration.
You're going to migrate DPW, is that what you just said?
They've begun migration of files for DPW right now, so far. Yep, so it'll be a process,
But that's what, I'm just back to the Office 365.
yes.
You're going to, when does that start rolling out?
They'll do the file migration first, making
Right.
sure that all our files
Okay.
are backed up in the cloud.
Who's running that since,
Our IT consultant, who's,
okay, not since we no longer have a director?
we did not get the Community Compact IT grant. So that money that was approved in the budget, as far as the special town meeting, we'll be utilizing that to purchase the network infrastructure equipment.
How much was that again?
The town's portion was around 52,000. And the Complete Streets project, that is fully complete. That project, the total cost of the project was $232,597, and that was fully paid through the Complete Streets grant. So that's, we are still eligible for $141,540, because the maximum is $400,000, so that's delta. And we would be eligible again for another $400,000 in fiscal 24. And that's
Do you
all I have.
anticipate that we're going to go for that additional 100 and some odd thousand?
The other night, I did recommend that the board revisit the prioritization plan, which we have to update before submitting for the next project.
Okay.
And the projects, their next priority on that was the town beach area.
You think of tangible use of state grant money, I can't think of a more visible, tangible program than what you did there. I mean, I think it was outstanding,
Yeah.
so,
Happy with it.
yeah.
Was the town beach building on the capital?
Yes, but we are waiting on an estimate for cost for that.
Okay.
Any questions?
I'm good.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, actually, Heather, before you, we're going to do budget calendar next, so, everyone should have received a copy of the budget calendar from the town manager via email. I think it came in last week. Before the meeting, the town manager mentioned to me that she has a tentative schedule from the department heads for when they will come in for the meetings listed as Finance Committee budget review currently on the calendar. Heather, when do you anticipate you'll distribute that?
I can send it out tonight.
Okay, great.
The one caveat is, the one board I haven't entirely solidified is sewer, but they're discussing it at their next meeting next week. They basically said, yes, it sounds good, but
Yeah.
just confirming with them after they meet.
Okay. Just a couple of notable mentions or reminders. I want to encourage all budget holders that have committees that are part of their department purview, such as land use has planning board and ZBA, and DPW has parks, that those boards be part of the process, and this is at least an agenda item for discussion on those boards prior to the budgets being presented, I think is the request from the Finance Committee, so just a reminder on that. I will make this an agenda item for our next meeting as well, and I would ask the members, once we do receive that from the town manager, just to review it, and if there's anything in your mind that is either not there that we would like to hear from somebody, and/or there's a specific topic that might not be covered in a normal annual budget presentation, that we let that be known well in advance so that we can have that opportunity to work with the department head to make sure that we're bringing the right information or the right commentary forward. One note that I did make when reviewing this is that we typically meet on the second and fourth Thursdays of the month. Currently, the 5-year forecast and capital plan is scheduled to be presented to us on the 20th, which is actually a third Thursday. I would be okay with meeting out of sequence in January and doing the second and third Thursday in an effort to let you give those presentations in the same week to the select board and the finance committee and move on with the budget. But I wanted to just check in with the board and make sure that everybody was okay with that. And once we get into February, forget the second and fourth thing anyway, because we'll be here pretty much every week, so.
I'm sorry, what was that date?
The 20th of January.
Okay. So do it the same night as the budget recommendation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll be meeting on the 13th, which is the second Thursday. And then, so this would be the following Thursday after that, the 20th, I believe, if I have the dates right in my head. And I'm going to bring up my calendar just to make sure. Yeah, so the Thursdays in January are 6, 13, 20, and 27. So we'll meet on 13 and 20, if that's all right with everybody.
So I wouldn't have it, you're saying do the 5-year forecast and the capital plan on the
Yeah.
13th?
No, I'm saying well, you had this scheduled for the 20th.
Yes.
The 20th is not a normal, that is an out-of-sequence meeting date for us. But I think we just resolved that that's fine. We'll do that on the 20th.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on the,
So I guess
Budget schedule.
I have a question. Do you have a ledger of interdepartmental charges? Which I don't understand why we do anyways, but like if schools charges parks and parks charges schools and cemeteries charges.
Karen would probably,
like when the schools pay rent to the Parks Department or to the town for the TC Passios or
Yep.
that kind of thing?
The TC Passios is a good example. The schools charges parks for use of the TC Passios building.
I think those are probably custodial costs.
yes.
So they charge the park department so that the custodians that are working get paid to be there. It's not really a transfer that takes place. I don't even remember seeing that, honestly, through the warrant process, so I'm not
That's what I'm
sure
wondering.
on
It's
that.
like they talk about it, but is it actually occurring?
I don't know, and off the top of my head, that there's any funds that are being charged to the park department that are related to special details for custodians at the school. I don't remember seeing that, but I could be wrong. The other transfers, like the money that PAC pays for the rental of the space at TCP, that money is transferred out of the enterprise account to the town facilities use account for that. The sewer department, there's indirect costs that are charged for the office space at the DPW, but that's part of their indirect costs and is transferred into the general fund on an annual basis through that. I mean, if you had something in particular that you knew, but off the top of my head, those are really
That's the
the only
example that
things.
keeps floating around my household, is schools wanting to charge parks for programming at TC Passios.
Just for, it would be the custodial.
But like, what does that even like mean? That you guys just move money all the time, $135 from here to there, or?
Because TCP is different, because there's no budget for TCP. It's basically, there's in-kind services for the school, or during normal operating hours for the custodian, and the revenue that comes in from PAC, and extended day that helps. with the-
Extended day, yes. I forgot about
the
that one.
operational
That's,
costs.
So is there this may be a good agenda item for a future meeting, because you now have me thinking, like, to my knowledge, we don't have a revolving account for TC Passios, do we?
do.
We do?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was created, what, 3 years ago?
It was, yeah, right around that time, maybe even longer than that. But it's for TC Passios and Brooks House, because they're town facilities now, not school.
Right. Okay, so for example, the rent that the school department is paying for TC Passios, is that going into that account?
Yes, I mean, it would, but there isn't any actual dollars that are being
Because it's being
transferred for that.
treated as
because it's-
in-kind services?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
yeah.
Just seems to me like an overly burdensome thing where as a taxpayer, I just pay money. I don't
Well,
understand transferring.
It's more for the way that the expenses need to be recorded in the general ledger. Because, like, if the park department is using that facility and school custodians need to be hired in order to be there when that event is happening, then according to Mass General laws, that's a special detail for the custodian, so there's a special account that's set up for those funds. So there's a charge, and I don't know that this is even happening, but what would happen is there would be an expense posted to the park department budget, and the funds would be transferred over to that special detail account for the custodian in order to pay his wage.
And I do know that, you know, for like the youth basketball and Bengals and all that, that does go into an account like that for the school department. But it's a school department account that comes from outside of the town for use of those facilities.
Yeah, so that makes sense, but this is the town
It's
charging
within,
the
yeah,
town.
it's one pocket to the other, right?
Right, for a building that the town owns, not the
Yeah.
school, so makes no sense to me.
Okay. Anything else on budget? Okay. Buckle up, we're getting into budget we just finished special town meeting. All right, so speaking of special town meeting, we have an agenda item for a discussion on special town meeting results, FinCom course of action for building projects, and debt financing. So I put this on the agenda really because after every town meeting, we traditionally put a review of town meeting topics on the agenda for a couple of reasons. Number one is to determine if there's any action items that the Finance Committee ought to take as a result of town meeting votes and discussion. And also just, you know, general topics that we may want to make note of as we look into further budgetary and financial considerations. Obviously, the big topic for this last special town meeting had to do with the TC Passios articles. I think that's where we spent the bulk of our time. And I noted in the last two select board meetings, which have happened in the interim, they've met twice since special town meeting. The first meeting, 3 members were present, and the general gist was that a reprioritization needed to occur and a relook at, you know, how do we go about determining what our needs truly are, and perhaps a recharge or some type of path forward charted by the select board to determine how to move forward and what the next proposal is. In my mind, what was missing from that discussion, and I did comment remotely into that meeting, was the absence of financial guardrails. And in my mind, that is one of the reasons why we kind of found ourselves on a path steaming forward into town meeting with 2 articles, neither of which had a hope of passing, because there really were no financial guardrails put in place earlier in the process to be able to determine if this was going to be copacetic or not. And to that end, I think that the Finance Committee has a role. And perhaps we had a role all along that we didn't realize or identify. But I think we have an opportunity going forward to take a more proactive stance in determining what those guardrails should be. How we go about doing that, I think, first we need to determine if it's something we want to do. And then secondly, I think we need to determine how to go about doing that. And I had a sidebar conversation with the town manager earlier tonight about perhaps we involve the financial consultants or ask her for a proposal in terms of, how best to look at the situation. I continue to be concerned about our borrowing capacity at the end of the decade when we have to go look at Turkey Hill. I'm equally concerned about our credit rating, which is very related to that, and I'm also concerned about just the overall burden on the taxpayers. So with that, I'll shut up and ask you guys if you have any thoughts or comments.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying with the guardrails in place, and I think we talked about this over a year ago when I first joined the board. I brought up that I thought we should be looking holistically at all of the upcoming charges that this town is going to incur, including infrastructure and other, and kind of lay those out and give budgets to these projects, whether it be the demolition and transfer to a park of Old Primary, whatever we do at Marshall Park, whatever we do with town offices and community. And then, there was a lot of desirements that were masked as requirements in that project. Extended day not being at the schools is one for me. I mean, I looked at all the neighboring towns, and I can't find one other than, I think it was Groton, that doesn't do extended day in the schools. They all do it in the schools. And to dedicate $5,000, 5,000 square foot, 10% of that project towards extended day is just a desirement. It's not necessary. Plus the busing that goes along with it. So I think that's got to be done. And things got to get prioritized, and we got to get within a budget. I know there's talk floating around about Prop 2.5 overrides. I would never support a Prop 2.5 override. Never. We have the ability to pay for this. We just got to do it smartly. So that's my opinions.
Any other thoughts? So on that note, I think, I personally have very mixed feelings about, I have a lot of mixed feelings about the site itself. I have a lot of mixed feelings about school functions going on with town functions. I still don't have my head entirely around the ACE program and to what extent we have options beyond continuing to house and run that program where it's run. But I do think that everything kind of needs to be put back on the table, and we need to have, to use your word, a holistic discussion once again, not only about the budget and our ability to pay for things, but also what are the totality of our obligations, not only program obligations, but these buildings, to include this building and the Ritter building. And, I was, so I mentioned the meeting that occurred 2 weeks ago at the select board meeting. The meeting this week, Mr. Jeffries was unable to attend the previous meeting. The meeting this week, I do think that he chartered a course that I think deserves discussion, which is, okay, if the town clearly does not have an appetite for 40 or 30 or maybe even $23 million, then clearly, if we're going to do a new building or even a renovation, the square footage needs to be substantially less than 55,000 square feet. So what do we do? Well, a good place to potentially start is taking the school functions out, or at least the administrative function out. And if we're going to be moving land use out of Ritter, and we don't have a specific use for Ritter, is there a viable option for Ritter? Is there a viable option to still get some use out of this building? And by the way, I think that there is. I think that PAC is a viable option here. I think that the meeting space that we have here is still usable space. If we can spend some money to preserve this building for a period of time and potentially use the downstairs for other purposes, to include non-governmental purposes. So I think that that's a road that we need to go down. I think we need to explore. I think we need to be thorough, but recognizing the fact that we've been kicking these ideas around for several years, we need to move with some speed. I don't know if May is feasible, but maybe next November is. But I do think that if we're going to do any of that, our role at the Finance Committee is figure out what the guardrails ought to be. And I think that, we need to make that known to the Select Board that that's our intent, is to play a role. And we need to make requests of the town manager and our financial consultants to help us do that and to run those scenarios.
Yeah, and I think where we have representation on other committees, our voice, collective voice, should be funneled through that representative. As was mentioned earlier today, that, we are looking at this, and this is, how we're, our role as a representative onto that other committee.
Yep. And I think that that's a discussion that I think is probably separate from the resolution that I just articulated, but I think that that's, my expectation is next Tuesday, the Select Board and the Building Committee are going to meet to discuss a path forward and potentially a recharge of that committee. And I'm assuming all options are on the table. Currently, the Finance Committee has a seat on that committee. I'll assume for now that will be the case going forward, but again, all options are on the table. The Select Board has complete control of that. And I think once that happens, then, assuming that happens, then we need to basically reform and probably reappoint for that role. Or at least reconsider and have a conversation about the expectations for that role and what our best path is going forward for that role. I don't have any strong opinions one way or the other in terms of who that should be, but I think that this is an inflection point that we need to take an active role in making sure that that the financial interests of the town are represented on that committee from the perspective of the Finance Committee.
Yeah, I think there's also, and it's kind of a future topic, but it relates to this one with the legislators, is these are real, beyond just handouts of, $100,000 here or $2 million here so that I can show that I love the town or whatever. I watch the Select Board meetings too, and I see them passing like 19 reams of paper down and I just say, how is this, good for the environment? How is it good for the climate? And then to store all those records and to heat them and, all the charges and the CO2 emissions and everything else, it just seems like green communities and in a state that's as progressive as Massachusetts is supposedly with respect to climate. Let's, seriously look at these records laws that are out there and then maybe we can even bring down our footprint by another 1,000 or 2,000 or I don't know. I don't know how many thousands of square feet was dedicated to all the records management associated with that. I mean, I can't tell you the last time I printed something at work. I mean, we just don't do it anymore in the private sector. And I do think to some extent, over time, there is going to be more remote work as well, even in public government. It can't go away totally, for sure. But again, I've been in the office at most once or twice a week over the last couple months and went almost a year without going into the office. So things are changing from that perspective, so. And it will be slower, I think, in town government, but.
Okay, I don't anticipate a need to take any votes on this at this point, but suffice to say, I will reach out to the select board chair and have a conversation with the town manager about, the best path to move forward and what is a reasonable strategy to come up with guardrails that are productive in this process. And I think that would be good for everybody.
I think my big concern is probably not at all for this committee whatsoever. It's probably more towards, I suppose, the select board. But we've now pushed off this project again. I can't imagine there's anything that can be done before annual town meeting. So we're talking at least a year from now before we actually get another vote for something on this. And in the meantime, thanks to the report from the TC Passios committee, we have, what was it, 177 kids sitting in a building that's built with asbestos. How long do they have to sit in there for? Because of our inaction. And that, to me, it's unacceptable. We should not, while we need to be responsible in terms of how we're spending our funding, I don't think we need to be putting the children, our kids, I have 4 of them, my own, in extended day, 3 days a week. And I've strongly considered pulling them from it because 15% of the building is currently unusable. I wonder if there's another side conversation that needs to go on simultaneous with this. It's that, yes, we need to do something about TCP. Yes, we need to do something about the old primary school, but at the same time, we have people sitting in that building that really shouldn't be in that building.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those are fair points. I think that they sit outside of the purview of this committee. I think that they're more in the world of the school committee. Having spent my childhood in that building and every other asbestos-ridden building of the Lunenburg School Department, I'm sympathetic to that. I have to believe that the school department is aware of that and does, air quality testing and that sort of thing. The presence of asbestos does not necessarily mean a hazard. It's when the asbestos is airborne that there's a hazard. And I have no idea what the specifics are of that building, and I've never heard it reported. So, but I think it's a fair point and probably one that ought to be
Curious how
raised.
often we do testing in there and whatnot, just in general. Lots of questions.
Okay. Anything else on special town meeting and buildings? Hearing none. Chapter 70 and next steps. So when we last met, it was my intention to have the legislators at this meeting, and I was not as diligent as I should have been in hounding our legislators, but I only had one confirmation for this meeting. So I made the executive decision to punt on that and try to find a date that was something that could be agreed upon by at least 2, if not 3 of our legislators. I've reached out to them via email this week and suggested the alternative of bringing them in on the 13th of January for our next meeting. That said, we have really not had, because we've been so focused on special town meeting, the opportunity to really discuss Chapter 70, or for that matter, put together a list of specific topics and outlines that we want to discuss with the legislators. So I made these 2 agenda items for tonight's meeting so that I can outline those points to them in advance of the meeting. With respect to Chapter 70, I actually did have a follow-up meeting with Mrs. Archambault, Dr. Burnham, and Mr. Cassidy a week or 2 ago. And the purpose of the meeting was really twofold. Number one, they wanted to bring some data to me, which I will share with you. I'll actually share my screen here in a moment. That was quite enlightening. If you recall, when Mrs. Novak was presenting, and she was going through the foundation funding analysis of our school department, in the back of my head, I always think of our school department costing us about $20 million, give or take, in our budget, because when you take our local contribution and Chapter 70, we're in that neighborhood. And she put up a number of $29 million as the total cost of our schools. And when it happened, I kind of, did a double take, but there was so many figures and so many concepts being thrown around that night, I didn't make a follow-up question. Mr. Cassidy noticed it or had the same double take and went and did a little bit of analysis. And what that number actually reflected was a fully allocated or fully burdened cost for the school department. So what that included, in addition to the Chapter 70 money and the local tax base, is every grant that we receive, Title I, circuit breaker, you name it, any kind of outside money, school choice, even debt service on the middle high school is included in those numbers. They actually allocate time from the town finance department, from the DPW for plowing sidewalks, you name it. Basically every dollar that is spent on those campuses or in support of the school function is considered in that total funding calculation. The reason why I bring that up is because there was sort of an aha moment to me, like that was kind of the number that I've been talking about, for the last couple of years, around having an apples to apples comparison and really understanding the total cost of the police department or the fire department or whomever, because we do have a number of shared services in our town that makes it unclear when you're looking year to year in a warrant, how much the police department budget is going up relative to the DPW, relative to the schools, and so on and so forth. So I'll share that with you. I did think that was an additional enlightening point that could have had a little bit more discussion that evening. But I went back and I rewatched the meeting, and I looked at the reports. And basically what it came down to me were there are basically three things that go into our Chapter 70 money, or how Chapter 70 money is determined and allocated. Four things, actually. So there's the total population of your school department, right? How many kids? There's the relative wealth that those kids come from, the town that we live in, if you will. There's the needs of the children in those communities. So you get additional money for children who don't speak English, English is a second language, or other learning challenges. And then for towns like Lunenburg, there's the hold harmless, right? Which is if you calculate those first three things and it doesn't represent an increase in your budget, or in your Chapter 70 allocation, then you get a nominal increase of about $30 a student every year until they don't do hold harmless anymore. And I've had a couple of conversations with Mr. Cassidy and with Mrs. Archambault about this. I don't think that there's any reason to believe in the coming years that Lunenburg is going to be in a better situation when it comes to our population, our relative wealth, or learning disabilities or special services, right? Like, by dead to rights of the calculations that have come about as a result of Chapter 70 and the Student Opportunity Act, we're going to be in this hold harmless category for the foreseeable future. And so the question is, how much does hold harmless get funded relative to everything else? And there's a lot of complexities to these calculations. There was another report around, town contributions relative to foundation funding and overrides and those kinds of things. We haven't passed an override in 3 decades, but we're still spending well above foundation funding. So, those nuances really don't matter to Lunenburg anytime soon, right? All that's going to matter is if Lunenburg and towns like Lunenburg say, we're spending an awful lot of money in income taxes and sales taxes, we're not getting our fair share, we need more money and hold harmless. So that was my conclusion, but and I did spend probably more time than I wanted to on this to come up with a pretty simple conclusion. But I wanted to, run it by you guys prior to communicating that with the legislators and saying, let's look at hold harmless as a topic of discussion or a potential, priority for our legislators or a request to our legislators going forward.
I felt when she did the report, and I was listening, and it looked like, and again, that every group had a thing, and it was like, okay, well, but if our town has this, then we get to do this calculation, and it adds or subtracts and whatever. And so I'm putting it all down, writing it, trying to understand, and she goes, oh, and by the way, at the end, you just get a little bit more. It's like, oh. But it sounds like it's like the committee that built an elephant. It sounds like that was built by a bunch of people, whenever it was, to do the things that they wanted to do. But fairly middle class towns like Lunenburg are probably, are not in dire need in the statewide view of it. So that's probably why it is. But it is probably a thing that I don't know if they can look at it. If it's something that, with a new governor coming in at some point, maybe that's something that would be discussed.
Yeah, and freshman legislators won't be freshman legislators forever, right? I mean, these are things that are probably not a 1-year fix or a 2-year fix, but I think we're correctly looking at these as
There's
long-term
also
trends.
plenty of other towns like us.
Right.
Who they could work with, who maybe have more senior people to help us with.
Yep.
There's plenty of North Shore towns and South Shore towns and Metro West towns that are kind of like us, maybe a little bit bigger, but in similar states.
Or in better situations
Yeah,
even that are,
maybe. And so, on the other hand, it's going to be, if we're getting $1, that means Springfield isn't getting $1.
Yeah, to me, I just walked away saying I don't think there's anything that's going to happen to change Chapter 70 in the next, whatever years. And I think I go back towards, if we're going to point our legislators to something, maybe it's going to be some other big projects and some other help that they can get us on that is not education related, because they're going to look at us being, a rich community that doesn't need these extra services. And
well, I don't agree. I don't agree with that. I think that, we can all sit here and look at the trends and clearly understand that if your tax base is growing at 2.5% and your Chapter 70 money is growing at less than 1%, and your school department budget is growing at over 3%, then sooner or later that becomes non-sustainable. And, we're not in a position right now where we're spending well above average or, beyond our means or those of comparable communities on a per student basis. Our teachers are paid on average relative to like communities in our area of the state. These non-sustainable trends will sooner or later turn into reductions in services or override votes. And those are the things that legislators will ultimately pay attention to when people are, concerned about, in particular, their kids not getting the level of services that they were previously getting. And I think that, these are things that can be planned for and budgeted in a way that they're not going to harm anybody. And I, maybe not, maybe I'm, maybe I'm overly optimistic here, but I think that it's our duty to bring these to bring these topics and these concerns to our legislators. I mean, these are the guys who control the purse strings. I don't know about you guys, but I give the state of Massachusetts an awful lot of money. You know, as well as the town for that matter. And I feel like, like many people in Lunenburg, I feel like I'm paying a whole lot more than I'm getting. Despite the fact that I got 2 kids in the schools, by the way. 1 kid now in the schools. 1 graduated. Anyway, I will outline that to the legislators. I already have to a certain extent, but I will do so again. Continuing the conversation about legislators, so we mentioned, obviously, Chapter 70 is a topic. I do want to kind of give them a list of other potential topics that might come up. I mentioned in my email to them the concerns around police reform and the training costs associated with police reform that the police chief has articulated some concerns about. I threw down prevailing wage just because it's a pet peeve of mine, and looking at some building projects going forward, I think that's a burden that we disproportionately bear. Not that I think that anything will be done about that, to continue on Mr. Menard's theme. But are there any other topics that you folks think we would like to raise with the legislators, assuming we get the opportunity to meet with them?
I guess, just back to TC Passios Building Committee, were there some kind of legislative drivers that added to millions of dollars of cost on that? As an example, there was the one where, because it was more than 50% rebuild, that drove something. I mentioned the things on records keeping being a
Records keeping, that's a good one.
significant portion of it. Can we get relief on this, or can we get grants to offset costs related to those sorts of things?
Yeah, I think the records one is a... that should be
Historic
easily
building,
solved.
can this be considered a historic building? So when this does get renovated, we get grants associated with that, so that we preserve the town. I mean, that's a good photo op, right, standing in front of the renovated town hall that was paid for by grants.
Like in Fitchburg? Anyone else? Anything else? Okay.
But I guess maybe an ask through you to, the town departments is what other thoughts could come up, at least through this avenue. I know the select board reaches out to them, but purely on finances, is there other, school board as well? Yeah. Are there other things that are unfunded mandates? What are the unfunded mandates that are just driving costs? I can't stand an unfunded mandate.
Well, one of the topics that's come up, and we could probably gather some details from the town manager and the superintendent, is just the compliance and reporting costs, right? So, we hired 2 new people a few years ago, and one of the stated drivers for both of those new positions was reporting and compliance costs, right? The excessive amount of paperwork that we need to submit to the state for a million things, I'm sure. Yes, am I on the right track? Yeah.
Reporting requirements and, for all various grants, there's always reporting requirements. You gotta count on.
Yeah, that's sort of a catch-22, right? But, yeah.
But some of them are more cumbersome than others.
My memory served me at the meeting, at the town meeting. Was there, did somebody say that they do keep electronic records, but the ones they keep paper are required? Is that, I remember hearing that. I'm going like, it sounded in my old industry, it's antiquated stuff. you go, why do I need this piece of paper? Because the NCUA will come in and they want to see that piece of paper.
Yes.
Right, so is that still the issue, is that we could get rid of the paper, but we can't because the state wants us to keep it? Is that still the? I wasn't really clear on that, and if that is the issue, then we should be talking to the legislature and say, let's update those laws so that we can, and then also maybe get us a grant to get us the kind of equipment to do those things.
Right, public records law requires retention of records for periods of time depending on the type of record. Some are permanent too, so we're required to keep them. The only other avenue would be microfilm, to turn them into microfilm.
Which is, yeah. It's like
That
going
is-
from paper to coins.
Get out your Betamax. Yeah, it's a worldwide, things change so fast. Governments don't change as quickly as others, but even non-government agencies still do that, so, yeah. So I mean, that is definitely something we should talk to them about. That's definitely a point that we can raise. It just doesn't seem, and I'm sure every other town, because especially when we're talking about, we're gonna build 1,000 square feet for paper at $600 a square foot, why would you do that?
And heat it for
And
30
heat it,
years.
and, yeah,
And
it's a,
cool it for
Yeah.
30 years.
yeah.
One of our, the capital planning projects is records retention project, which would reduce the amount of records that we currently have, because there are some that can be destroyed. You have to go through that process with the state, and store them properly and catalog them so we can get on a schedule of when they can be destroyed. So overall, it has a good, beneficial impact to the town because we're going to reduce our footprint that we're going to need for storage.
Are there towns are there municipalities in the state that outsource records entirely?
I'm not aware of any, but I'm sure that's,
Because, I mean, in business, you can go to a company like Iron Mountain and just they take care of your, the stuff that you would throw away that you need to have, burned. They'll take all your records and digitize it and store it for you if you want, like whatever you want. They'll take your records and do whatever you want with it off-site, and you don't have to store it.
off-site. I don't believe, we still have to be the custodian of the records. I don't believe we could do.
So we can't
that
physically
entirely.
give them to somebody
Right.
else to maintain for us.
Can we put it in the bunker at Marshall Park?
Because, I mean, I know, from speaking with the town clerk, they're accessing records every day for birth certificate requests or, who knows what, but,
Right, so this project is completely archived records.
Yeah.
Like, there's records every department uses on a day-to-day basis that we access.
Right.
This is, long-term storage that we're required to do.
okay, thank you. All right, anything further? I promised the town manager it'd be a quick meeting, and we're over an hour, so.
Promised my daughter that.
Minutes. There are minutes in the file from, and I don't have them in front of me, but I believe November 14th and 28th.
November 4th
4th.
Fourth, yeah.
and October 28th.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I've read them.
Has everybody else read them?
Yeah, I saw them the other day.
Jay, you're shaking your head. I'm taking a no. Okay.
They were a good read.
I have not read them, but
Okay, so I'm gonna
pass them through too.
punt, and I owe minutes for the meeting before special town meeting that I said I would do. So, we'll punt on minutes until our meeting on the 13th. Items for future meetings, we've talked a little bit about, one other item that I had hoped to get on tonight's meeting, and it was just my own fault, I didn't follow up promptly, is to get the Green Committee to meet with us, so I will extend an invitation for them as well for the 13th. And hopefully they can make that happen. If not, we'll do it later in the on the 20th, in conjunction with the financial forecast meeting. Anything else for future meetings?
I'm going to start getting busy.
We are. Get ready. Although we had a pretty busy fall too, comparative to the last few years. It was, we haven't really gotten a good break. Okay. I've gone out of order. Any committee reports? Nope.
I'll kind of give one that's not my committee, but I did go to the meeting, and because Dave's not here, Parks Commission did kick off their Marshall Park planning with WOLA, who is their architect that they put on contract. So the video is on YouTube if you want to watch it. They kicked around ideas as to what a future Marshall Park might look like. And there's a set of upcoming additional public input forums for that project, which kind of stagger, I guess, with the old primary school park architect projects as well. But there's a lot of exciting things that could be done with respect to Marshall Park. So if folks are interested in that, make your voices known and publicize it, because ultimately, anything that gets good public input during the architecting phases is much better than at town meeting or on Facebook after the fact or something.
It's way more fun on Facebook. Do you know if the location on the skate park has been resolved?
Yeah, they voted to give a portion of land to the skate park, and it's near where the playground equipment is right now, am I right? Yeah, so when you come in the main near Conrad's.
Off to the right.
It's kind of like, almost straight ahead or something. And they're working with council on how to go forward with, giving that land to the skate park to use, and then, gifting it back afterwards, and, how to avoid giving requirements so that prevailing wage kicks into these poor kids, and, so yeah, that was, that's where it's looking to go.
Okay. School committee met last week. I did not watch the meeting. I have a discussion with Mr. Cassidy. I know that the numbers and the topics that we discussed tonight around Chapter 70 were raised, and beyond that, I'm still due to watch the meeting, so. Any other committee reports? Public comment? Anyone? No? Okay. That's it on my agenda. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We will take a roll call vote to adjourn.
Oh, I forgot about
Oh,
that.
we'll just leave.
Mr. Simeoni? Mr. Gray?
Yeah, aye.
Mr. Waters?
Aye.
Mr. Menard?
Aye.
And an aye for myself. We are unanimous and adjourned.